helpful having that.
Good morning. I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask the secretary to call the roll.
Senator Allen, Senator Pan, Senator Wilk,
Present.
Assemblymember Nazarian, Assemblymember O'Donnell,
Here.
Assemblymember Gallagher, Juan Morales,
Here.
Cesar Diaz,
Present.
Daniel Kim,
Here.
Keely Bowser.
Here.
We have a quorum.
So it's my great pleasure to start this meeting off by recognizing two individuals who have served here with the board, and we wanted to take some time just here at the very beginning, a short period of time, to recognize them. The first is my old chief deputy, Jacqueline Wong Hernandez, who's moved on to a new job, but we want to present her with a resolution and acknowledgement of her dedication and service to the State Allocation Board. Jacqueline was appointed by the governor November of 2017, and her first State Allocation Board meeting as chair was January 24th, and she just recently left last month, and I'm already personally missing her quite a bit. So during that time, Jacqueline informed decisions such as approving the new full-day kindergarten facilities grant program and providing unfunded approvals for over $1.7 billion worth of projects. So we do really appreciate your service in this body, Jacqueline, and wanted to recognize you today. So. And yeah, maybe I'll do both of them at the same time. Is that okay? And then I also wanted to recognize Mr. Jeff McGuire with a resolution as an acknowledgement of his dedication and service to the State Allocation Board. Jeff was appointed by the governor on December 28th, 2015, and began serving as Chief Deputy Director for the Department of General Services. In April 2016, he attended his first meeting at the State Allocation Board as a member, and he will retire from public service effective the end of this month. And so congratulations on that. And he's just been a big part of all of the work that's gone on here for the last several years, and we appreciate all of your service here at the State Allocation Board. So thank you, Jeff.
Can we take a shake? Yeah. Where do you want to start? Right here's fine. Yes. No, I'll get out. I'll get the director. No. If you guys want to take care, that's even better. So I'd like to get all the members. Yes. Okay. Yes, let's do it.
Oh, spontaneity is really good, so it's okay. Practice too much.
Fair enough. Do we stand? I don't know.
Let me get on that side. How about that? Even it out.
Can we move this
All right.
we
never knew how
Oh, should we move them to the... Good idea. Ready?
That's nice.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Yay.
Physical chairs against those.
Yes. Thanks, everyone, for allowing us to do that. The second thing I would like to note that I think everyone will be happy that our meeting's going to be a little shorter today is that the two appeal items under tab 7 have been withdrawn from the agenda. And now I will ask for the minutes to be approved.
Minutes are ready for your approval.
So moved.
Is there any public comment on the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion? Oh, you already moved it. We're good. Done. Yeah, but vote. Sorry, I'm out of order here.
Calling it on
microphones, please.
Assemblymember O'Donnell.
Aye.
Juan Morales.
Aye.
Cesar Diaz.
Aye.
Daniel Kim.
Aye.
Keely Bosler.
Aye.
Motion carries. Chair, would you like to leave the roll open?
Yes, I would like to roll. And now we'll move to Ms. Silverman and her. I think so. There's a red.
Yeah. Cesar, can you turn yours off? I think it's competing.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry. We'll now turn to the executive officer statement. Thank
Yes.
you.
Hi. So we have a few items to share with the board tonight. So one of them is we were highlighting with the board over the last few months that we are definitely near the point where we have enough modernization applications on our workload that would definitely cover the modernization bond authority for all propositions. So as we have been receiving applications on a flow basis, the applications that we received on a daily basis, we actually have report today $27.5 million in bond authority left as we speak. As applications walk through the door, we are very close. So we'll be sending notifications out to districts once we hit that threshold. So we just want to give that highlight to the board tonight. Will be the requirement after this point, once we hit that threshold, that districts will have to submit a board resolution acknowledging that there will be no guarantee of future funding once you submit your modernization application, and it'll be put on an acknowledged list as well. So we just want to highlight that for those future modernization applications. Filing round closed, and we had an abundance of applications for the first filing round, so that's super exciting. For the first $37.5 million, $324 million in applications came through the door. So again, that's quite an abundance of applications. So we're super excited, and we're going to present those applications to the June meeting. And to recognize that we have a subsequent filing round that opens, and that is for the remaining $60 million. And those applications that submitted for the first filing round are eligible to resubmit for that May filing round as well. And we wanted to highlight that we had a career tech education filing round that did close, and those application scores was released from the Department of Education, and those who had a score of 105 or higher were eligible to submit a funding application to our office. And that deadline was February 15th, and we've received over 200 applications, so that's great news for our program. And we're going to present those that were eligible for the highest scores and present those to the May State Allocation Board. And one other thing to note is we still have $250 million in the program, and so we're working out some details with the Department of Education, presenting the plan to the next State Allocation Board meeting before the end of June, and as far as when we'll propose the next filing round. And we also are talking about potential regulation change, and so we'll be introducing some stakeholder meetings in the future. We also want to give the board an update on the priority funding apportionments. In October, the board had a fall bond sale that we actually had $442 million in apportionments, and we had nearly $300 million that we released in those apportionments. There was 21 applications that didn't come in for their apportionments, but they didn't lose their funding. They were actually related to some charter school projects, so they still have some time to perfect on their project. And there was also a good portion of those projects also related to career tech education, and they actually have a different timeline, so they have until October to come in. On the subsequent page, we also want to give the board a highlight. There's some regulations that went into effect on January 24th, and that related to the career tech tiebreaker, and that was something the regulations were approved by the board in August. And then our next State Allocation Board meeting is in March.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any? Is there any public comment on the testimony? Okay, we will move on to the consent agenda. Public comment first on the consent agenda? No public comment. Can I have a motion? It sounds like Cesar's got a motion. Can you call the roll?
Sure. Senator Wilk.
Aye.
Assemblymember Nazarian.
Aye.
Assemblymember O'Donnell.
Aye.
Juan Morales.
Aye.
Cesar Diaz.
Aye.
Daniel Kim.
Aye.
Keely Bosler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, now we will move into the meat of our agenda. First issue is the status of fund releases.
Okay. So on the financials, on tab 5, we just wanted to report out as we were sharing that the apportionment act. In January, on page 55, we had $442 million that was released, $44.2 million that was released. I apologize. And then on page 57, I just wanted to highlight part of the consent agenda today. There was over $120.1 million that was part of those approvals. And also those activities, the projects that were approved that actually had a 5.45% CCI increase in those approvals as well. So that was part of those approvals. And we also wanted to highlight that nearly $500,000 was also part of the agendas as far as the closeout adjustments and a reduction of costs incurred. So that's part of the financial reports as well. So with that, I'll open to any questions. Okay.
Is there any public comment on this item? All right, we will move on to the next item, which is status of funds.
We just covered that.
Did we cover that
Yeah.
too? Okay,
Yeah,
so we
sorry.
covered both of those. And so now we are on to the first, so we have the 2 items that were withdrawn, and now we're on to tab 6.
Yes, tab 6 is an appeal
Yeah,
appeal
go
request from Pleasant View Elementary School District. This is a small school district located in Tulare County, and it is an appeal related to a new construction project. This appeal has 2 issues for the board's consideration, one relating to occupancy of the project prior to funding application submittal, and the second related to new construction eligibility. And if I could draw your attention to page 120, there's a timeline of the projects available for your consideration here. The district had submitted a design application in 2014 during a time when we were out of bond authority, so the project was placed on the applications received beyond bond authority list with acknowledgments that there may not be future funding and the criteria could change in the beginning if there was funding available. The district took out a certificate of participation in order to begin the project at the local level and got their plans approved by the state architect, went out to bid, got the contract in place in 2015, and issued the notice to proceed. The classrooms were built and occupied in August of 2016 at the start of the school year. The funding application was submitted in September 28th of 2016, so after the school year had started. This is the first issue in that the requirements for the school facility program new construction are that the application be submitted prior to that occupancy date. With respect to occupancy, there have been discussions at the State Allocation Board in years past related to the last point at which an application can be submitted for funding consideration. The concept being that new construction funding is intended to house future students or new growth. And we actually, at the request of the board, had gotten an Attorney General opinion that indicated that once the students have occupied those facilities, they can no longer be considered for new construction funding because they become existing capacity for existing students. However, there were 3 appeals that came before the board previously that did seek funding after they'd occupied or after the date and regulations that the board had specified for application submittal. The board did approve those appeals in the past. The occupancy issue is one factor, and that relates to the full funding the application. However, for both the design application and the full funding application, there is a secondary issue in that the district submitted based on eligibility from enrollment from the 2013-14 school year. And again, this was at a time when we weren't processing applications or eligibility. In June of 2017, the board determined that new construction applications would submit new construction eligibility updates at the time that staff was processing the projects that had been submitted. And the board at the time was concerned with making sure that projects were funded out of Proposition 51 were going to school districts that had a need for housing new students. When we were processing the design application, we were using the 17-18 school year enrollment information, and it resulted in negative eligibility for the district. And if you look at the chart on page 126, it shows the enrollment for the school district between 2008-9 and the 2017-18 school year. And what you see is that there's a peak enrollment in 2011-12, and then there's been a decline in the years since. And what that has done is that instead of a positive projection of students coming into the district, it results in a negative projection. And you can see the enrollment on page, if you go one page back to 125, in 13-14, when the district submitted the application, they would have had new construction eligibility, but in the 17-18 enrollment update, they are actually showing that they have more capacity available than they do have projected students. So the design application was returned by staff for lack of new construction eligibility. The full funding application was returned due to the occupancy issue. The district has appealed that and is requesting that the board allow them to use the 2013-14 eligibility to support these projects. The 13-14 eligibility, because they are a small school district, they could lock in the eligibility, or at the time, had we been processing, they could have locked in their eligibility for a period of 3 years, which may have covered the full funding project if we were processing back in those time periods. Current eligibility does not support it. However, this is our first appeal that we're hearing related to new construction eligibility where we don't really have a solution for the district's eligibility situation. We heard 2 appeals back in December from school districts where the eligibility from 17-18 did not result in anything for the project. However, the 18-19 enrollment did support those 2 projects. That is not the case here. The district has indicated that if they were to provide us with the 18-19 enrollment information, it would still show a decline in negative eligibility. So we were not able to provide that as an option for the board in this case. So staff is concerned with both pieces, the lack of eligibility for the project as well as the occupancy issue. We are not able to make a positive recommendation because we do have that legal opinion that says that that is not a project that is eligible for funding. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and the school district is also here if there are questions for the district.
Anyone have any questions?
District. Would you like to come up here? Thank you.
I'm Mark Hudson, I'm the superintendent. Try to slide in here, sorry. I'm Mark Hudson, I'm the superintendent.
Thank you, Superintendent Hudson. I can appreciate that you were qualified to apply for the new construction eligibility funds. But when you applied, or when you actually had awarded the construction, your enrollment was actually going down, and it continued to go down every year after that. Is that correct, based on the data that I'm seeing?
So when we applied for the eligibility and had the eligibility at the time is then when we took out the COP to begin building. And so since then, yes, I mean, there's a number of things that have taken place in the Central Valley and Tulare County, and I think it's probably a lot of that's drought related as well. It hit us later in terms of enrollment continuing to decline. But at the time when we did it, we have a unique situation in that I'm a K-8 school district, but I have 2 sites. And the site that was originally built, and it's in my letter, was built in the community, whereas the original site is outside of the community by a mile or so. And there were 10 classrooms built back in 2005, 2006. So when we started to see a spike in enrollment, we had eligibility. It was an opportunity to build out the school in the community to try to provide more services in the community and reduce transportation costs. We were running 8 bus runs morning and afternoon. So it has declined since then. There's no question.
I'm just trying to see how I can appreciate your position. It's a lot of money to absorb within a district's budget, but I'm not sure what the rationale or justification would be for the board to change its policy on this case.
Yeah, at the time we went with what was currently the regulations at the time, and that's I mean, a lot of small school districts like myself, we don't get eligibility very often. That's when those opportunities present itself. We decided to go down that road. At the time, you got in my position, I'm superintendent, business manager, part-time business manager, human resources. I don't drive bus. I don't have a bus driver's license yet. But I fill so many different shoes that I rely heavily on consultants and architects and those project managers to help guide me through this process. And so I took all the information at the time, and that's how we proceeded. I mean, it's been a difficult 5 years, I can tell you that.
Appreciate that. Is your consultant here? Yes. Can you speak to how they ended up in occupancy prior to? Because one of the rules is.
Well, I can address that. So the plans were approved in November. Our project manager from our architects didn't submit plans to CDE until June. I don't know why. And in the middle of all that, the person who I relied on the most heavily was my inspector of record, Chris, which I laid out in the deal. Chris had come to me in late May and was diagnosed again with cancer and then ended up passing away in October. She was the person I went to for everything. The questions I had day to day between contractors, architects, Chris was that person, and I lost her in June. And so from that point forward, I didn't know. At that point until mid-September. And honestly didn't know it was a regulation issue until we came to the appeal process. Ken is my consultant on eligibility.
Can you tell us why you thought this would be eligible?
So it's been a long, challenging road. Some of the unique circumstances here. One is that, again, the decline hit well after we were deep into the recession, but at the same time, it was more of a issue related to the drought. And as was mentioned, and the district has not seen a rebound since that crisis hit. Obviously, we're having a wonderful water year this year. And so we're hoping things turn around. There has been more wells created. The school that's in town is actually on city water. So it doesn't have the well issue that the one out of town does. So it was another reason for building project. There is development planned. There are tentative maps. There are anticipated growth that will occur. And so this project, the 8 classrooms that have already been built will get utilized and actually are being utilized. So it's in terms of eligibility, there's been some low numbers in the kindergarten class, which is, of course, is what the key factor is when we do the 5001 form that does the enrollment projection. So even though they don't currently show up, it's a very common issue in small school districts. And that's why on the previous appeals, they were fortunate enough to have those numbers resume within time to justify it for your other projects. We just have not seen that rebound happen yet, but we know it's on its way. It's just didn't arrive in time for.
What I'm just trying to reconcile is the fact that the construction contract was awarded in 2015, but enrollment has been declining since 2012.
Right, but we had anticipated it would rebound and just hasn't yet.
That's a big guess to make as a consultant.
I think the 13-14 numbers, there was a jump in our kindergarten enrollment, which is what triggered those numbers. So that's what led to us going down that road. Because I think it was like, I don't know offhand, I think it was 80-some kids, which was, I don't know.
There's a spike, but there's also a significant, there's a spike. But there's also a very, my apologies, Madam Chair. There's a spike, but there's also a significant drop in the times that there has been more water. So
I'm not arguing, like, in terms of water.
I don't want to put you in a difficult spot.
No,
I'm
it's
also
tough,
just interested to understand the guesstimate that was taken in this process, because I can appreciate your position in being beholden to folks that you rely on to provide you the information. So I don't think we're looking to you as much as we're looking at how some of these estimates were made.
Well, let me just address the water issue, because I flew up and testified before the EPA about a year and a half ago or two on this issue with rural school districts and those of us that are dependent upon our own wells to provide water and this. And what we saw is our well went dry at our old campus, and we had to drop a new one at our own expense. We went from 180 feet, we had to go down to about 700 feet. Everybody around us at the same time was dropping wells, and so the minute those wells came on, the agriculture wells, then ours went dry. And so we had to drop our own. How long it'll last, I have no idea. The one in the community had water issues as well, but they have recently just put in a brand new well. There is, I think, there's still some tentative maps. That one was extended after the crisis in late 2007, 2008. And there are some people that are looking at it, but there's still a water issue. So the water, it's not that the water issue has been resolved by a couple nice years of rain. We still have well issues that a lot of the small rural schools like myself are still going to continue to deal with, because during this last few years, a lot of agriculture has gone to digging their own wells. And the minute those come on, they're coming from the same. So that the water issue, that's all I can speak to on that. I mean, I think it's a difficult situation all the way around. I think moving towards the community was our best chance at the time. And now we're on public water down there for the majority of our school. But again, I did the best at the time with what I knew was allowable. And
Again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to harp, but I don't think my question was as targeted, directed to you as it was to. I'm still very interested to hear from the consultant on what matrix or what parameters were used to come to the conclusions that you did, because this isn't as much about the school district. Again, I understand the position you're in, but
Yeah, I'm sorry, and my name is Ken Reynolds. I'm president of Schoolworks, and we help the district with understanding what their eligible calculations are. We work closely with OPSC, and they're wonderful to work with. I'm making sure the projects are complete and accurate as well as can be. And again, we analyze their enrollment as the district shares information with us each year to update them on what the trends are, again, using the state forms. As a consultant, I also provide other services to other clients, but said we've never done a detailed demographics analysis for this that would provide maybe a more accurate result. But we were just reporting on what the projections are showing, what their capacity is, and therefore what their unhoused student population would be in terms of eligibility. Again, we didn't really advise the district on what the best.
Let me ask you, what's
position
the
would
due
be.
diligence process that you utilize, given that there are many school districts of the size Pleasant View school district is situated in, that heavily rely on your advice and may not have the scale to have the staffing to be able to, this isn't where I come from in LAUSD, this wouldn't be an issue. But I feel for the smaller school districts who heavily have to rely on your expertise. And being briefed on this issue just raised a lot of concern for me. That what are the matrix that you're using for other school districts? And has this happened in other places?
The eligibility numbers do fluctuate, and that's because the enrollment projections do fluctuate. And it's not an easy science. I've worked with Cash and other groups in the past on trying to come up with a better model. In fact, the model we have today has more options in it because of some of the unreliability, in the science there. The work we do, right, is we are illustrating to the district what their funding possibilities are. It's up to the district to really focus, and especially the school board, to focus on what their needs are and what those resources are. Unfortunately for Pleasant View, this is their only resource. They have a very small bonding capacity. They could probably only issue maybe $600,000 worth of bonds if they went out and were successful with a bond attempt. They don't really have development. There's some planned development, some potential development, but that's not even a resource for their facilities. So when there was the opportunity for funding and the potential need for funding based on developments that were planned and the growth they were seeing up through 2011, they knew they were going to need more space. And again, it hasn't come to light. Hindsight's always 20/20. But the information we had at the time was they had an eligible project. They had a concern about capacity. They had a resource, and changed. That's when it really threw us into a whole new dynamic situation that we face today.
Yeah. Senator Allen.
Okay, I apologize. Came in late. I was at the thing with the Chief Justice. Can I ask the staff, what is this nexus between enrollment projections and this blown deadline?
It's actually two separate issues. So the enrollment projections are one thing that the district needs to come to the board for, because setting aside the issue of occupying the classrooms, if we were processing these applications and we determined that based on the 17-18 enrollment projections, the district had no eligibility.
Oh, no eligibility. Okay.
So even if we could get past that issue, then we also found out that the project was occupied prior to the application submittal, which in regulation, that makes you ineligible for new construction funding. And we have an AG opinion related to the last point at which it can be considered eligible for new construction funding. So we would have returned the application for that piece, even if the district had the eligibility. So there's two different issues that make this project ineligible for us to fund.
Now they're claiming that that the enrollment projections that you're looking at, which you say are make them ineligible, are incorrect. There was some sort of mistake made at some point, or
Ours were based on 13-14. That's what initially kicked this project off. Had there been bond capacity at that point in time in 13-14, we would have been eligible and funded for, but we were put on the waiting because there wasn't. So that's, then when we went ahead and built the project.
But you're supposed to kind of update the projections, right?
But we'd already built. We'd already built the buildings.
And then you're asking for backfill,
Right.
of the money. And what's the procedure for that? Like what made you guys, was that common practice to do that?
So
Or sort of a calculated risk on your part?
Based on what I see districts around us doing all the time when it comes to.
Okay, and then they didn't. So they had a certain enrollment growth. It leveled off, which moved them from what would have been eligible before to ineligibility. Is that effectively what's going on? And was there what kind of advice was being given to school districts at the time about how to handle this kind of situation? I mean, I can see why a district would want to move ahead. The slowness of the process.
from our office, in order to submit the application to the applications beyond bond authority list or our acknowledged list, where it was just submitted but not reviewed, school districts had to go to the school board and submit a resolution that basically acknowledged the risk for the project. So the resolution has a number of points in there that there's no guarantee or commitment of state funding. The rules might change. The project might be returned. If the district proceeds, then they're doing so at their own risk.
And
So
you
that
guys
was
just
the
sort of
advice from them.
figured we're going to take this risk and hope for the best in a situation like this?
We didn't anticipate. We anticipated some sort of funding coming, a bond.
But how did you get that? When you passed this resolution, you just thought something will come through. I mean, listen, Governor Brown did that with the high-speed rail.
This is what I'd been told.
Yeah.
You got to understand, he's not Ken's a part of the people that were consulting to me, but I have an architectural firm and project managers there too that were consulting the same thing. And when the bond passed, the regs didn't change until I think June of 2017 on the eligibility thing. So that's
okay. Can I get a little more detail on this timeline issue? So I understand they were ineligible, but I also understand at the same time they were eligible at the time that they passed it, and they took a risk, and it was a calculated risk, maybe it was an appropriate risk, I don't know. But then there's this timeline issue that I'm having trouble understanding. So there was a mistake made by the district in terms of, or the consultant, in terms of paperwork filing.
Correct.
And can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. So in the regulations, the last point at which you can submit an application to be considered for new construction funding is the day before you occupy the school. Once you occupy any of the classrooms in the construction contract for that facility, it's ineligible for new construction funding. It becomes existing kids and existing capacity.
And how long has that been in the regulation?
It's been in the regulations in some format for the majority of the program. Back in 2003, it was related more towards the date from which you signed your contract. So you had 180 days from the date you executed the contract to submit the application. So there's always been a time point in regulations that tells when it's still considered a new application for new students.
And would you say that like everyone in the business knows about this?
It's a very, I mean, we hardly ever have issues with this. This is the fourth issue in the program history that we've had with this occupancy date. It's one of the first things that we always emphasize when we're training or doing presentations on new construction, but it is a widely known piece that it's critical because
Have the 4 cases been from different consultants or different people?
you know, I don't know who the consultant firms were. That was back in 2000, early 2000s. So
We haven't had this problem. Everyone's been getting it right for 20 years or 15
about
years.
10, 15 years, yeah.
Can you give us some understanding as to what happened in your case?
Yeah, the plans were approved by DSA, I think it was November 24th or 25th of 15. My architectural firm, I guess, did not submit those plans to CDE for CDE approval until June.
You're the superintendent.
I'm the superintendent.
Right, okay. But you're oh, you mean the one you hired, right?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So they didn't submit, I guess, the plans to CDE until June, and those plans weren't approved in back to, I guess, till September, which was then sent to them then to help me fill out the 5004. So that I don't know why that delay. I don't have an answer on that. Well, and my inspector that I had, who was the one I had the most confidence in, and that's the person I went to because I saw her all the time. She's the one that ended up passing away. So she went off the job in end of May, early June, and passed away by October.
So okay, just so I better understand the timeline, there's a timeline in here, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
page
it?
120.
Let me take a look at this. If you want to ask a couple questions, let me just take a look at I know you have some questions you wanted to ask. Let me look at the timeline. Oh, sorry, Cesar.
While the
What page?
senator is
120?
looking at the timeline, so I'm looking at what your situation is, and obviously every appeal is unique, and this one has quite a bit of problems. There's another thing that I'm looking at beside the timeline, occupancy, and of course the AG's advice. You have a situation here that you're talking about in your application that you may consolidate the 2 sites. And we're talking about water scarcity issues, but if you do that, then would that not lend against the idea this is being needed in terms of your
The consolidation, and I explained this to Brian a while back, that worst case scenario would be if we had to go back to one campus. Like if enrollment continued to decline over the next so many years and you had to go to one campus, I can't go back to the old site. I have no kindergarten facilities on the old site. So everything would have to go towards the community. And so we're not planning to consolidate everything to one campus in the community tomorrow. That was just an option long term if we need to. Because with 2 campuses, you have a redundancy in staff that most K-8 schools are not dealing with. I have twice the maintenance operation bus drivers. I've got twice the secretarial staff, office staff. So that was one of those long-term things that if needed, because I can't predict enrollment, and when you're in a small school district, it does fluctuate heavily. And so if it were to go that way and we needed to move to the community, that would be our best option.
So what are the criteria that you would see in terms of developments being approved? We're hearing signs that the housing market is cooling down dramatically, and does that
So
have any
what I've
effect?
heard recently, they redeveloped the community plan in Poplar. And when they did that, back in the housing crisis, there were tentative subdivision maps for about 500 to 600 homes. But when the housing crisis hit, those disappeared.
Right.
There was one map that's around the school that was, I guess, and I don't know this, I guess they're a 3-year period or something. It was extended for 10. I don't know if that's correct, but there was 2 subdivision maps in Tulare County. That one was around our new site in the community, was extended for 10 years. So they're getting close to coming up. That's coming up. But there was a big home builder in Visalia, as well as self-help homes were looking at that property, but it was contingent upon the new well in the community going in, which is just, I just got that report in not too long ago that well is, they had a test well there, but now they're building the well there. So I can't predict whether they'll come in and take that opportunity, but there's only 2 different subdivision maps that are already tentatively approved in Tulare County, and that's one of them around that new school site.
Thank you.
Richard. Senator Pan.
Well, just looking this over, I mean, the inspector dying is an incredibly sympathetic situation, obviously, but isn't it still your consultant's responsibility to meet the deadlines? I mean, there have been all sorts of, we often hear very difficult situations like that. It's oftentimes someone passing away that leads to some problem. But this is what you do for a living, and this is the first time we've ever had this particular problem in over about 15 years.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we weren't a project manager on this project. We were just providing assistance with calculating eligibility and filling out the forms. So when the district provided us with the plans and the CDE approval letter and the DSA approval letter, we prepared the documents and had it turned in within a couple weeks of receiving all that data.
So the issue is with this kind of slow the state government from the.
No, it was my project manager from the architectural firm that we were with. When they got the plans, I'm new to I'm learning a lot as I go through this, but they should have then submitted then to CDE, and CDE then back to, which would then trigger the 5004, and that was the delay.
But who?
My project manager from the architectural firm that designed the buildings, and who was another piece in guiding me through the process.
So they didn't get the paperwork in on time to CDE as they were supposed to. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what the timelines. I mean, obviously we missed a timeline. So when I was in contact with them and the contractors through the construction process and our inspector, my understanding was the school would be ready to go August 8th, first day of school, and we missed that by a month and a half because it was submitted late.
What's the name of the firm?
Mangini, Tellin Parrish and McLean.
All right. So, first of all, I just want to be clear that I know this has been said by staff, but when you're on the what's the list called again? The
Acknowledge list.
Acknowledge list. And I know we've talked about this multiple times in this board that I've been sitting on. We emphasize there's no guarantee of funding. If you go ahead and build, because we don't know when the next bond comes, and we can have a whole conversation about the way we finance school construction and how crazy it is when we're doing one-time bonds and so forth. But aside from that, and we've even had discussions about whether we should still continue an acknowledged list or not because of this very type of situation, because unfortunately people then have expectations. But every document that we require, that we say you're not expecting, you have to pass a resolution, everything is to say, guess what, you go build, you're doing it on your own dime. You may get state funding, we may decide, but there's no guarantee, there's no promise, no nothing. You decided, you made the decision, you go forth, take responsibility for it. All right? Is there any question about that?
No,
Okay, so I just want to be sure, because that sounds like to me I've heard that over and over again, so I want to be sure there was any confusion there. Okay, so you understand that. All right. And then I guess the second part is that who, and I realize that small school district, who was supposed to give you guidance about the issue around this very long-standing policy that you cannot get funding after you occupy it? It's no longer new construction. I mean, was this some decision you made on your own? Did you talk? Who told you that it was okay to do that? So the whole issue about occupying the space before. I mean, that's a big problem. That's a long-standing policy of this board. We've heard only 4 violations of this in 15 years of existence.
I'll be honest, it was never my intent to violate any regulation.
Sure. Okay, but were you advised on that? Did you seek advice? Is that something that someone tell you that was okay to do? Did you ask questions?
I didn't even know at that point. I was unaware of that.
Okay, but that was a decision you made on your own. You didn't check with somebody and said.
I checked with, at that time where I'd lost my inspector who was already off the job. When I went to contractors and my architects and project managers, my question to them was, will the school be ready for the first day of school? And I was repeatedly told yes. Now, where that breakdown, that was never communicated to me. Mark, wait, we got to wait. We don't have the plans back from CDE yet. Like, I had never heard that. So.
Okay, and that wasn't something you used any consultants for or anything like that.
But with that, when it came to that, that was my day-to-day. More consultants on that time would have been my architects and my project managers.
And
I haven't heard from them since.
And have they? I assume you select them because they've done school construction before.
They're well known in our area. Yes.
Okay, for doing school construction.
Yes.
Okay.
They're probably one of the largest in the Tulare County area.
Okay, I mean, because what I'm struggling with is that's they should be paying you back then, because really, frankly, because they they didn't advise you appropriately. If that's who you're counting for advice, and you picked someone who supposedly knows what they're doing, they should have told you, well, guess what? If there's a policy that if you move in, then that triggers these things, and they should know that if that's who you're counting for advice.
Well, I know that now.
Yeah, I know. Well, but the thing is that they should have told you, right? I mean, to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know what degree you can, I don't know if that's a violation of their contract or not to basically put you at risk. First of all, there's no guarantee of funding anyway. But the thing is, they essentially just put you in a situation where, it's really hard because we don't want to open a door for other people to come down and say, well, guess what? That it's okay to start doing this, because that creates a whole lot of big policy problems for us if people start saying it's okay for us to occupy and still try to get this money. I mean, that's the reason that policy is in place.
Senator,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
and board, if I may address you.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, please. There we go.
Assemblymember Devin Mathis. This area is in my district. To better clarify the area, this is one of our very, very small, disadvantaged, high immigrant populations that's right outside the city of Porterville, which a lot of you may recall was the city without water that got hit extremely hard in 2012 with the drought. Their schools went out. They've gone through a lot of things. This area doesn't have a lot of money. They don't have the access. They don't have the professional skilled people to come in and help them with the consulting process. They lost somebody that was running the project. And, this area, it's literally one of those places where there's 2 stop signs in the entire town. The city of Porterville is growing. They've just recently got green bus, and a lot of people will move out to this area because of the lower rental cost and housing cost. I know Self-Help is looking at this area to expand. We work well with them, and I know we're talking about building more housing in this state, and this is one of those areas that definitely has room to grow to match. But this area needs a lot of help, and it's very clear that they didn't get the proper guidance, and everything kind of got lost in the sauce on this one. But I really encourage you to help them out. As stated earlier, the board in the past has appealed 3 times to help things out. And there are some other circumstances here that aren't like others, especially with the drought, especially with the population and their access, and losing somebody on top of that is just kind of made this a whole mess. And it's very hard for me to sit down and see one of my superintendents kind of get hammered with person that could answer them is no longer with us. So I ask for your sympathies on this and to better understand it. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Did you want to?
Well, just to clarify, when you say they're no longer with us, is it this inspector, or is it the folks from Mangini who seems to have?
No,
the day-to-day person.
My inspector, day-to-day. She passed away in October.
But the inspector worked for the district?
Yeah.
But aren't we ascertaining that it was the folks from Mangini who were supposed to?
I'm not saying that wasn't part of it. Like, yeah.
It seems to me we need to bring them in and have a conversation with them. I mean, especially if they're doing this, and if they're the main kind of player in the area, they're putting other districts in the area at risk if this is the way they operate.
Well, and Senator, I don't, with her passing away in October, I think she was the right hand that was giving our superintendent here all the information day. So, I mean, who knows what she knew, what she didn't know, what the company knew. I mean, and that's the difficulty with a loss. I mean, if she was here with us today, she could probably answer every single person's questions inside and out.
So she was the interlocutor with the firm.
She was my main go-between. I mean, I had a project manager assigned to me, but when it came to looking for advice, because contractors tell you one thing, architects tell you another, and Chris was the one that would tell me, no, this is what you can do. This is what that was the one
was she working when she passed away?
No.
When did she leave?
She went away for treatment, and it was the end of May or early June.
And how does that interrelate to the date in which the mistake was made?
I had nobody then on the project other than the architect up until the end. I had nobody.
That was made. So the problem happened
after
she left.
We even had to go back and do a retest of a fire system because they hadn't. They had somebody do it, but they weren't a DSA inspector. So then I had to go back and redo that as well later on.
But this timeline problem happened after she left the job.
Yes.
A couple of things getting confused here, and I don't want to microphone, please. Sorry, I don't want to. Mr. Wilk is trying to ask a question. But there's a couple of things, and I don't want it to get mixed or confused because some of the estimates that were made also precedes all of this and goes back several years.
Yeah, right.
That's why there's I can appreciate that the architect made some mistakes, but we still haven't gotten answers to some of the why this source of funding or why the overestimation. And honestly, I haven't been satisfied with some of the answers that have been provided here. And to Senator Pan's question also, I was waiting for you to maybe delve in and say, have you had experience working with the architect in previous times? Has this been a recurring factor with this specific architect? I thought you were going to ask that as well, but so I was waiting for that. But that's something else that I'd be interested to know. But going back again, I'm very sorry for your loss, and I can appreciate what it means when you lose someone who you so heavily rely on. But there were some things that were decided upon prior to any of this. And I think what I'm trying to get at is how were those decisions made? How were those conclusions arrived at? And does that happen in other places now? Because my general thinking is that I don't want to impact. Sure, I can wait.
Go ahead.
What's important here is to make sure that the kids aren't paying the price for mistakes made. That's my general philosophy. But I also don't want to be rewarding mistakes that now can be, if there can be things happening over and over again, and that's what I'm trying to understand here. I don't want to. I would not want to incent that behavior.
Oh, I get it.
So that's why, to some extent, these are questions, all due respect, not for you to answer. But I'm interested in knowing more from the consultant as well as from the staff of what's going on. So I apologize for jumping in because I'm trying to get into this, but Senator Wilk,
Are you chairing the meeting now?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Actually, maybe staff can answer some of Member Nazarian's question about the architect.
It seems like, I agree with you, it seems like this project, it's a very sympathetic project, a good project, doesn't fit this program, this funding sources and the rules around the integrity of this program and how it was set out. And that was an issue. But you guys go ahead and elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the architect is concerned, I mean, we don't really have, the project is something that was designed, built out years ago. So it's kind of hard to try to solve issues that have been done, since 2012, 2014. So it's hard to sort those things out. So it's also hard to figure out whether or not we have multiple issues of that nature with the same architect firm. And sometimes you're dealing with firms that don't even exist anymore. So it's hard to sort those things out. I mean, should we be keeping a track record of those problem companies? Yeah, perhaps we should. Because, you know, there's nothing worse than having these appeals come to the board and having these potential big takeaways. So, I mean, you bring up good points.
Madam Chair, if I may ask for a motion to defer for a month so they can come back and better answer the board's questions and better be prepared.
My concern is this conversation has gone, way out of this room. I don't know that it's really the purview of this board to investigate everything. I mean, the facts have been presented. Clearly, you've admitted that mistakes have been made, and the ask is for a policy exception. And it's kind of a yes or no answer before us today from the way I see it. I just think we got to weigh in with a yes or a no if there even is a motion.
I mean, one concern I have is about precedent, and how this will be viewed if we make an exception here by other districts and other projects that come before us. So that without a framework for, I think we have right now here today. It's a very, I mean, I've been following everything going on in Porterville for years. There was a really rough time. And during the drought and the drinking water issue, the administration is very familiar with, and that's also something we're trying to deal with in other venues. But today, I don't see the way that the program's laid out. I don't see the place where we have a clear framework for making an exemption in this case, and so that makes me nervous because others will come after you, and they may not be as sympathetic, and they may be a lot bigger projects and all of these things, and it'll be hard to say, well, we need to treat you differently because you're not as sympathetic. I don't know. These are the concerns I've got. Oh, Senator Wilk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you for what you do. I know it's a tough population group, and I appreciate you being there, day in, day out. This is kind of off track a little bit. I'm new to this board. So do you have your doctorate in education? Masters, and so it's in what, in
educational leadership?
Okay. Do they spend any time, because I have a lot of rural schools in my district. I mean, a lot of these people here are urban areas, so they're not familiar with the challenges that we have. Do they teach any of this stuff in those programs at all?
No.
So you're overly.
This is my first experience.
So you're overly reliant on your consultants.
On everything.
Part of it's been act of God between the drought, which was not anticipated, and the passing of your go-to person. I think there is some malfeasance, I think, for some of these others. So I'm not heartless yet because I'm new to the board. So I'm incredibly. And I understand everybody's position.
We appreciate that, Senator.
But I'm going to oppose the staff recommendation because I just don't want to do that to you or to your children. And if anybody else votes the other way, I totally understand. But I'm sorry. And maybe it's not this, and I agree with you, this is probably not the proper venue, but maybe this is something we ought to take a look at in our duties, and because I'm sure this is not the first time stuff has happened like this, and it's not, particularly if it's the same players. So
yeah.
So I appreciate all the conversation, and definitely looking at the history of this program. The program could use some updating. Definitely there are situations that are out there that call for that, and perhaps in the legislature's purview, given that this body is made up of the people that can make those decisions happen and for future programs. But we all have the integrity. All we have is the integrity of the existing program. And I comments that were made, but I'm going to make a motion to approve the staff's recommendation to deny the appeal.
For a second?
I will second that.
Clarify the process. I just want to clarify that. It's staff's actually recommendation to the board was to deny. So it's really the district's appeal before you. So they need they need the votes to overturn staff's recommendation.
Okay, so we have the wrong motion on the table. Sorry.
take the
Okay.
first
Okay. I will clarify the motion, basically to support staff's recommendation.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Secretary, can you call the roll? Oh, sorry. Sorry, one question. Before we call the roll.
So there, and I hear people saying the facts are there. There's also a suggestion that we give a little more time. I mean, let me ask staff, is there, so I think some of the things I'm hearing is that, first of all, of course, and I agree, we don't want to set precedents. I think I heard from the chair that in some ways the original request is somewhat, didn't really fit in the box it's supposed to fit in. If there was a deferral, is there any way to see whether some funding could be done, given that would not create a precedent, but would more appropriately fit into a box? And maybe the answer is no, but I just want to throw that out there. If there was some time to look at it, given the circumstances, so anyway.
Yeah, and no, that's a good question. And when we have been looking at the applications where there have been eligibility challenges, one of the things that we try to do is look at every option we can to try to find some funding. We don't have any solutions for this one. Using the 18-19 enrollment for the two other appeals, that was one of the ways that we could fix this, fix that for the districts. We don't have that option right now. And whether it's the design application or the full funding application, in both cases, the 17-18 or the current enrollment doesn't justify the application. So we don't really have any options because it all hinges on that new construction eligibility piece that they don't have with the updated numbers.
Okay.
So I don't know what we would bring back to you next month with options.
Okay. No.
I wish there was something we could do.
Can I just clarify the process? Do we not need 6 votes to approve the district's appeal? They're appealing staff's recommendation, so we need a motion to approve the appeal, which is against staff's recommendation. Is that the process?
Yeah, staff administratively denied it. If there are not 6 votes to approve the district's appeal, then staff's action stands.
So unless there's a motion and a second 6 votes, then this appeal does not get approved.
Correct.
Staff's action stands.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Can I just better understand the procedural issues involving the Assembly member's idea of postponing for a month? How does that, how would that potentially work?
So, I mean, I think the problem came in the president's report, which said that we're going to have all these applications in, and there's really there's no modernization money left to allocate. So it's just the new construction. And so right now, before this body, I don't know that there's any other funding streams available. Is that right?
Right. I mean, so we promised to take to the board these new construction appeals as quickly as possible. So if we just sit this in the parking lot, I mean, we're supposed to take action on as quickly as possible. So I'm not sure. I agree it should be I'm not sure, a yes or no answer. And it's difficult. I know it's difficult.
Yes, I was wondering if we just delay this, I don't know what additional information would be provided that would sway any of us to vote differently.
For me, I guess would be to get to the bottom of this question of the role of the architectural firm.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Again, the policy consideration before the board is either to approve the appeal, deny the appeal. I don't think the facts are going to change. As much as this is a tough decision, I get it. And people are fearful about setting precedent, as am I. So I really think, from my perspective, the board should weigh in on this matter today, because I think it's been shared from the staff side that there's not much more information they can bring forward.
So I guess there a motion to approve the appeal is the question. No, that was a different motion that Juan pointed out was the wrong motion. Sorry. We'll rescind that motion and we'll start over. Reset.
I didn't understand your motion.
Resetting.
I move to approve the appeal.
Move to approve the appeal. Is there a second to approve the appeal? Second. Secretary, call the vote. Call the roll.
Senator Allen? hand. My mic's on. Is everybody else's on?
Senator Wilk, yeah, thank you.
One.
You start over. Mike's off.
Senator Allen?
Aye.
Madam Chair, can I just make a quick comment?
Yes.
As much as I love my colleagues sitting to my right, I do disagree with the idea that this is just a yes, up or down vote. I think this program is still a program that's being shaped by the policies we make. So it's very important that when issues like this come up, we utilize it to figure out how we can support the school districts in question, but at the same time effectively addressing some of the issues that we don't want to turn into a precedent. So to me, this was a good debate, and I think I abstained because I would have wanted this to continue to figure out how we can help the school district. Because I voted, serving in this committee, I voted on many occasions when I've seen in favor of the school district, even when the final vote had lost. Because to me, it's very important to make sure that the kids aren't paying a price, especially in rural areas. Some years ago, we were voting on a school district that only had one high school, and it had been under a circumstance of heavy mold for 3 or 4 years. And it wasn't getting the attention that it needed. But because of some of the issues that had taken shape in that district, ultimately the vote went against it. So I'm very sympathetic and I would want to support, but I also feel that this was an important opportunity to address some things and root out some things that happen that we don't want to see happen, especially to smaller districts. Because again, you don't have the resources necessary to be able to do what some of the bigger districts are capable of doing. So I don't know if, I would hope this isn't a final determining vote. I would hope that there's a way of helping, but trying to figure out how we can address. Honestly, it's not a good enough answer to say that there are these private factors involved. This is public money, and so the integrity of it can't be compromised. And I'm not pointing at you. I believe you when you express that you were working with what you have. But I think it's our responsibility to also figure out what doesn't work. That's why I was asking if we had had a working relationship with this architecture firm. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time for this or not, but we've had strike teams or outreach teams in the past, and it's been very successful. And if that modicum of an investment can help overcome some of these challenges, I think the more resources in making sure a handful of staffers for the entire state can address and address these issues before they become an issue and before you're sitting here and getting the outcome that you just did. So I'd want us to make sure that we're looking at that opportunity as well.
I think that the conversation really illuminated a lot of program design issues around rural districts, especially where they may not have growing population, but they have real other structural issues this time in a location that was not serving the students. So I am very sympathetic to the reason why the additional school site was built. But clearly our program is a little too rigid in that regard, at least this funding stream for new new construction, which is it's really meant to deal with districts that are grown out of their existing school sites.
Well, I think, Madam Chair, we've got new construction money, modernization money, which is out now, but what we need to look to going forward in the state of California, I think Mr. Gallagher would agree, is some type of pot of money for schools that are dealing with disasters. Okay, no water is a disaster. Fires are a disaster. Mud is a disaster. So those will be some conversations the legislature will have going forward this year.
All right, we'll move on to Hayward Unified Alameda. Go ahead.
So Hayward, the Hayward appeal is related to the emergency repair program. In 2017, the district received an apportionment from the emergency repair program for a roofing project. They did not complete the project within the timelines allowed by regulations, and administratively there's nothing that we can do to extend the timelines. The district had indicated that they had some unusual staffing turnover during the time period that the apportionment was provided, so they didn't have anybody that was available to start the project. However, the emergency repair program funding was designed to address the facilities that had high needs of repairs and things that needed to be fixed, and the roof does still need to be taken care of. The work hasn't been done. The district is requesting an additional 12 months to complete the project. We have had 3 other districts that have submitted appeals related to extensions on their timeline for this program. In those circumstances, the districts were typically a little bit further along in their project progress. They had either come very close to completion or they'd had other factors that required the timeline to go outside the original date. For example, they had to close down a school site to do the work at one of them. So we do have a little bit of concern with the time frame on this project. However, if the funding is not extended for the district, it will not go back into the program to be used for other facilities needs or for emergency repair program projects, because that program is now over. So it would just go back to the general fund and would not be able to be used for other districts. So we have no major objections to the board providing an extension, but administratively we cannot do anything. And I believe the district is here to address any questions as well.
Yeah. Yes. Should I call for the public comment first, or yeah? Ernesto Ramirez.
Thank you. My name is Ernesto Ramirez. I'm the bond construction coordinator for Hayward Unified in Alameda County. I'd just like to make 3 quick points in terms of the allocation that has been provided to the district. One is that this rainy season has just reconfirmed what we know, that there's still a need to replace the roof at Lower Eden Elementary. 2 is that the district's fully committed to getting this project done. We have hired a consultant, a roofing consultant that is about 99% complete with the drawings. We anticipate going out to bid in about 2 to 3 weeks, and we're fully committed to getting this done during the summer.
When it stops raining.
When it stops raining, correct, if it ever does. And the last point that I want to bring out is the fact that there has been a high turnover of senior managers at the Hayward Unified. I have been there for about a year, and it wasn't until about the fall of last year where we became aware that funding that was at the district was specifically allocated for roofing replacement at the elementary.
Oh, wow.
So.
All right. Well, hopefully that's getting fixed.
Yes,
okay.
We do have a major need.
Any comments on this one? Senator Pan?
I guess the one comment I would have to make, though, is that I understand this is really important. This is an emergency. I just sort of odd that an emergency got delayed. It's like you think that I'm just concerned about the safety of the students and the rapidity of which part of the reason it's on appeal, because it's sort of like, well, you have an emergency, but yet you're not moving out the money, and I'm sure, and I understand there's reasons that happen, but that also makes me a little nervous about well, those kids. I mean, the reason it's an emergency is because those kids are in there, and we need to get it fixed. So I'm certainly going to support of this, but it does make me a little nervous that the reason we're here is because an emergency was delayed, right? I mean, addressing an emergency was delayed.
Is there a motion? Senator Pan moves. Cesar Diaz seconds, and roll call.
Senator Allen?
You're not coming on over the microphone for some reason.
Well,
Aye.
Aye.
motion carries. Did that come over now?
Okay, yes.
The next item on the agenda was really just a special report, informational item, given the devastating disasters, especially that impacted Paradise, just thinking through how you go about rebuilding an entire school system. And I think we have some people from Office of Emergency Services and the State Department of Education that are going to help us just understand a little bit better the processes in place to support those school districts, especially Paradise Unified.
So it looks like for some folks to join me, yes, we also have the Division of State Architect as well. Yeah. Let's give them some time to join us. Good afternoon. Just wanted to thank these folks for joining us today and the opportunity to speak to you about the emergency response when it comes to disaster the collaboration here and the co-lead that many agencies do work together when it comes to these natural disasters. So in the event of the emergency affecting California Public Schools, we have representatives today from Robert Larson, the Deputy Public Assistance Officer, and we also have Lynn Olson, who's a Senior Emergency Service Coordinator from the Office of Emergency Services. We have Juan Morales, who also from the Department of Education. You all know Juan, Director of School Facilities, and he'll be sharing some highlights of what his role is there in this process. And James Hackett, who's a Division of State Architect, and he's a Principal Structural Engineer, Code and Policy Standards here in Sacramento. So we honestly want to just share, when the Camp Fire began in November 8, 2018, it soon became the deadliest destructive fire in California history. But hundreds of schools have been impacted, not only in the recent wildfires, but mudslides and other disasters. In the wake of the event, staff has been providing a report on its role and what our role is for the Office of Public School Construction in the event of these disasters, and what we fund as far as when it's damages to the facilities. So as this multi-agency process in the aftermath of the Camp Fire, these prior disasters, we wanted to share with you how these joint agencies work together. And we have Cal OES, California Office of Emergency Services, and the Department of Education, the Division of State Architect, and the Office of Public School Construction, among other state agencies and local school districts and their leaders. And they collaborate to join the state agency, Federal Schools Task Force, to provide a broad range of support and their efforts to not only rebuilding the school districts, but their local communities. So with that, I also wanted to introduce the California Office of Emergency Services, and he can share what his role is.
Sure. Is this on?
No.
There we go. Oh, so again, my name is Robert Larson with Cal OES, and I'm Deputy Public Assistance Officer. And public assistance, what that means is that we help to support counties, cities, tribes, special districts such as schools. And as we all know, with what happened up there in Butte County, up in Paradise, pretty much the majority of the town was lost, about 14,000 homes, along with the big portion of the school district up there. There's several buildings there that were lost. There's lots of trees that are dead and lots of trees that need to be removed. Also trees on neighboring around the school that belong to private properties that also are dead that need to be removed. They're all a safety hazard to the community and the public at large. So what we do in public assistance is, right now this was declared a major disaster, disaster DR 4407. And so FEMA is in town. We're working with FEMA hand in hand, and we are working with the school district. Over there in Butte County, there are several applicants in Butte County that we are working with. The school district is one of the top 4, just because of the damages that they have and everything that they are dealing with there. Currently, they are working with an arborist to identify these trees, and we are there to help them and assist them. We have technical people that are coming to help them, FEMA does, and we are there to help them get the trees identified. There's a certain way that needs to be done to make sure that everything is eligible. And with the state, we work as their counterpart to make sure that they do all the right things to make sure that they get every single penny that they are entitled to. Because it is a reimbursement program. It's not a grant program. It is a reimbursement program. And the way that it works now is that normal procedures is that FEMA will pay 75%. 75% of what the damages, what the losses are. The state, what we pay, Calaveras or the state, we come in and we pay 75% of the remainder, which works out to about 18.75%, and that leaves the locals on the hook for 6.25%. Now, recently we got approval, FEMA approved to where they're going to cost share at 90-10, which means FEMA will cost share at 90% of the category A and B work only. That's what they got 90-10 for, is A and B only, which is emergency work, which is tree removal and all of their emergency response work. And in the state, we will then cost share 75% of the 10%, which leaves them on the hook for about 2.5%. Pretty good deal. We're looking to we're working on it now to where we're going to probably absorb the full 2.5%. So it would leave the locals with nothing.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yes, that's what
we did build that into the budget.
Yeah, and we're working on that now. Yeah, we the other day, myself and the public assistance officer, we spent about 8 hours going through all of that. About a day and a half doing it, and we're working on making sure all the numbers are okay and that there is enough money there to do so. Again, we're here to support the locals, the communities, and that includes the school districts. And we work with FEMA. If there's any questions that come up, if the locals or the applicants or subgrantees have any concerns, then we are there to help them and assist them through not only the beginning here, but also till the very end when the projects are all done. We help them with their time extensions to make them get through the process. If there's any version changes that need to happen, we also help them with that. It is a tedious process. It does take a long time. There is a lot of times it seems like there is nothing going on, nothing is happening. But believe me, there is a lot that is going on and a lot that is happening. Currently, that's what we have there with the disaster up there in Paradise in Butte County. As we all know, the current storms that are happening now, we have teams that are out in the field that are doing evaluations. They're called initial damage estimates. And we're possibly looking at a potential other disaster that's out there too. That won't affect just Paradise, but several other counties also. There's 21 counties that the governor did proclaim as part of a state of emergency. Storms that are happening this week, that could turn into a whole new event. So we've been very busy. There's been a lot of work out there in the last couple of years. 7 major events in the last couple of years, along with all the only state-only events, and that doesn't count. Each year we end up with about on the average, between 8 and 12 fire events, which are FMEG events, which are smaller fires, but they're still events, still plenty of work. So any questions I can answer on anything that any of you may have?
Just to thank you for all the work that's been going on. It can't be easy. I mean, just the amount of, I've been reading so much about the efforts, and on every level, it's just enormous. I mean, of course, we have one of our colleagues here who represents the area, so my heart to all the folks who are doing this work. It must be heartbreaking heartbreaking and backbreaking, and I just want to recognize that.
Yeah, thank you. I second what Senator Allen was just saying. Watching all of the departments, it's really a government-wide effort when you're responding to an emergency. And the way the Department of Education worked with OES during the emergency was really just wonderful. And it was on a lot of those unified command group calls every morning and every night. But now is the hard part. What I've learned from our Cali OES director, Mark Girladucci, the recovery is almost 10 times harder than response, and that's the part we're in. I'm interested to hear a little bit about, I know insurance is part of it, but then also federal grants, and I think maybe Department of Ed knows that more.
So our role in emergency services really dramatically increased in 2017. And part of it was because more schools were impacted. More schools were damaged or destroyed. Part of it was also due to your leadership, Madam Chair, and you were instrumental in helping us be part of a unified coordinated group at the Office of Emergency Services. And that really helped that schools had a voice in these coordinated efforts when we were responding. So the department has representatives that goes to the State Operations Center when there's a natural disaster, when the SOC gets activated. We go there and help with the response. We are not first responders. We don't have boots on the ground, but we do collect information that I think is very critical for all the efforts at the state level to help. And I think what was very important, particularly in 17 and moving forward, was the emphasis and the priority that schools had during this whole process. I think there was a general consensus with the governor's office, with Cal OES, and of course the Department of Ed, that schools need to be prioritized, that we need to think about them as we coordinate efforts to help them. Some of the information that we provided, that we shared during the response, was status on the school, on schools, whether they're damaged or destroyed. And just to give you an idea, since 2017, we've had a total of 12 schools that have been completely destroyed. That's both public and private. We've also had an additional 14 schools, public and private, have been damaged. That's just on the facility side. Now, on the impact of students, there were over 7,000 students that lost their homes, and over 800 staff that lost their homes. So that brings with that a lot of trauma to students and staff. So even though some of our efforts in responding have been focused on status of schools, also school closures. That was a main emphasis too. Schools are closed. What's it going to take to reopen the schools? Which ones are closed, and what can we do to help them to reopen schools? And going back to the facilities side, there's always been an issue with temporary housing. You know, where are we going to place these students, particularly the ones that we're going to schools that were damaged or destroyed. We need to find a place for them, and we need to find a place for them quickly. And we really had to think outside the box and get creative to try and find solutions that we normally wouldn't be comfortable with, because we know that there are certain requirements to have students in learning environments, and we had to look at buildings that are not suited for school use, that are not Field Act. But we all knew that it was a temporary solution to try and get the students back in place. And that's when we worked closely with Cal OES and the governor's office to issue executive orders to, in some cases, waive those requirements in specific situations, because we knew that. But interim housing was and has been a continued issue, because getting the students back with their teachers, with their peers, is critical so they can return to some sense of normalcy. But along with that, and not just in the response, but in the recovery, there's a lot of other efforts that come into play where we provide assistance. Some of it surrounds counseling and trauma and recovery. We do look at funding that is available that may not be covered by insurance. For facilities, the first stop is usually insurance. And then there's also some FEMA reimbursement that could be available. There could be some funding from the state, from this board, through a facility hardship to fill the funding gap between the insurance money and what it costs to build or rebuild. But there's also additional federal funding that's available that we've pursued to help with some of these additional costs. And we continue to do that because some of these costs are not covered by, again, insurance or FEMA. But in the case of the Camp Fire in Butte, we send a team, the department sent a team of folks to their education summit We had experts in many different areas, you know, including nutritional services. You know, there's when students are displaced, they become homeless, and then we had experts in that area. And what does that mean? And what schools do they have to go to? We provided assistance to charter schools, and a lot of these services. It depends on each situation. Each situation is different. We're always there to partner, especially with. They've been wonderful to work with. In fact, we've co-led a joint state schools task force that, you know, was specific to help address any unmet needs that are at the local level. And that's how it typically, you know, things get funneled up to the state. You know, the districts at the local level working with their county offices of ed, their local county emergency operations center. If they can't meet those needs, then it gets elevated to the state, and that's when there's things that are called mission tasks that I learned from Lynn, and what could be done at the state level to really help those unmet needs. So our role has shifted. Again, we continue to provide services. The recovery is very difficult, and it's ongoing, and it's going to take a long time. But we are there to partner with the state agencies, and we're there to support LEAs.
I want to share James Hackett, and he will give his oversight about what DSA's role is.
Good evening. Compared to CDE and compared to OES, our role is much smaller, but we do provide support, and I think that's what our fundamental goal is in any emergency. If it is a fire, as in the recent disasters, we respond and wait for response from OES. For DSA to take our staff to send them out to a site, we could be endangering them. We could be putting them into dangerous situations. So our response, generally, we want to run our coordination through OES. We do that through DGS. And DGS has an emergency coordinator, and that's our actual connection. So we reach out to them, or they reach out to us, and then that goes back through OES in that path. So there is actually a circuitous path that we get involved in. When there is a disaster, let's take an earthquake, for example, is slightly different. That can lead, depending upon the size, that can lead to tremendous confusion. And so our role is to really advise districts to first, if you have engineering firms or you have your design professionals, the quickest and fastest assessment you're going to have is to utilize them. And we try and advise them to work with those folks and to make sure that they connect with the local command center, which includes OES. The reason for that is the paper trail for being able to secure FEMA funding. If you get down the road and you need to be able to do so, it's very cut and dry. I mean, if you step out of line, you may not be able to apply for that funding. So we try to make sure that folks do, in fact, go through the OES process. Secondly, if that doesn't happen, we advise them to go straight local command centers to hook up with them. Thirdly, if that appears like it's going to take too long, we will send our staff out, and we can send our staff out to school districts, state buildings. We can send our staff out to whomever, and we'll do that. But we have the responsibility to, again, fall back in and do everything in accordance with OES's procedures. So that's our initial immediate response. In the case of the fires, we worked closely with CDE. We worked together, put together a team where we went out and, as part of a team, and assessed some of the different school sites that were affected to in essence, give guidance to school districts. Our biggest message to them is we will give you high priority. And so if you, in fact, have an issue, if you have had some burn, we will expedite your plan reviews if you come back through us. And we understand the emergency and the need. So that's predominantly what we do. But our role really is, in many ways, is a support of CDE, support of OES, to make sure that we advise our schools to do things in a manner that's not going to compromise them down the road.
Assemblymember Gallagher.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it was a great coordinated effort on many different departments' efforts coming together. And, you know, a key thing was really trying to keep a lot of the classes together with their teachers. And I think we did a lot of work there to ensure that was the case, finding spaces, because we had, I think it was 4 elementary schools, the high school, and then there was 3 charter schools, I believe, all up in that ridge area. And so finding that relocation was good. One thing we're working on is the counseling services and mental health, because that's going to continue to be an ongoing issue. But I just wanted to note, and the gentleman from Cal OES was highlighting it, but one of the reasons why we're trying to remove a lot of the dead, dying trees up there, because there's a lot, as you could imagine, is that we're hoping if we can get the trees removed up there, that the high school will actually be able to graduate on the field, the traditional field that they graduate on this June. So that's, you know, a big effort that we're trying to make sure that can happen, and a lot of that is part of trying to return to that normalcy, right? Like, hey, that we are going to come back, and things like that can really make a big difference. So I appreciate the effort that's been made on that, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to get that done. So thank you all for all your different effort, all of the agencies working together to help our community.
And we will continue to work with Paradise, and to consider bringing forward the next action next month is to accelerate Paradise modernization project for board action next month. So again, our goal is to identify and continue to identify funding opportunities for any district who has the ability to access not only the program funds and the facility hardship, but any program, and through the coordinated efforts with this joint task force and any agency. So again, we're continue working together to see if any funding opportunities in the future. So.
Thank you. Is there any public comments? Otherwise, we can wrap up. Yes.
Did you want to take care of the open roll?
Oh, yes. We have the roll call open, and
thank you, Lynn.
And is that all? What else do we need to?
For the minutes and for the
minutes,
consent.
yes. So let's reopen the minutes.
Okay. So I'll just quickly ask Senator Allen, Senator Pan.
Aye.
How do you vote on the minutes?
Aye. Aye.
And on the consent?
Aye.
Great. Thank you.
And with that, the meeting's adjourned.